Spectroscopy yesterday, what we already know. So, I've heard that word spectroscopy mentioned in so many conversations, and I have watched what I consider really good YouTubers, good presenters, good audience and followers try to talk to spectroscopy. And I'm going to fail just like they did. So here we goes. Long, long time ago, people noticed burning things in fire changed the colors of the fire. Now you have to put this in. There was no books to study. The only knowledge that you had was, if you had the words for it, was from the person next to you or your own experience. Because knowing something without being able to explain it is not of much value. So the conversations are kind of a part of the progression, and you learn from each other in these conversations. It's a give and take kind of thing if you respect what the conversation's about. So spectroscopy, men burning things in the fire. Notice the colors of the wood, the colors of the twigs when you throw them in. It's why our fascination with fire goes back, just because it's fascinating. It still is. To play with lighters and matches is so much more than a fire risk. So this spectroscopy thing truly is ancient knowledge. That when you burn things, the colors of the flame mean something. A good blacksmith knows the different colors of the metals he's working with when he's heating them. He knows an orange glow from a yellow glow from a red glow, and what's the best glow to use a hammer with. Otherwise, you start changing the metallurgy of the metal itself, the sword that you've mastered making over tens of generations. The steel for that sword in Japan, what, revered tools, amazing tools. Long ago, in a different language, parallel time to what some folks speak to. So this noticing the colors of the fires got built on over generations. We started to make bowls and learn that if we fired those bowls, if we heated them up, maybe trying to cook in them, that the bowls became harder and firmer. That was the first bit of pottery. Now, that pottery today is called ceramics in the scientific realm, or pottery, depending on which of those domains that you're in. If you're a historian versus a some type of mechanical engineer that does stress analysis on ceramics for turbine engines. So this is how far these things have come. But the spectroscopy, a name that wasn't invented till long after we started realizing these properties, it was probably in the line or in the domain of alchemy, right? Where the wizards were mixing with the real world and trying to figure out what's going on. So the words used were more magic than reality. And out of that came the sciences, the scientific method, the need for peer reviews. It forces communication and clears up inconsistencies in language and in knowledge and understanding. It is not just the content of the paper, it's how the materials in the paper are presented to a common understanding audience. But there's domains of those audiences. A mechanical engineer presenting to a biologist about ceramics and the properties of say, amorphous materials might have a confusing conversation with a biologist that's worried about bone density and structure, and but they're trying to understand the mineralization of the calcium deposits in your bones and how they might. So maybe the structural engineer has some chemical, who knows what value is in that conversation. So those probably get had. I would hope they get had, just because that's the kind of bullshit I'd talk about. So where is it? Where does that go? This spectroscopy thing. You go back into Mendeleev and his creation of the periodic table of elements. That is a presentation. It is just one view of the elements available on this planet and the elements available that mankind has learned how to create. These are the things that Mother Nature worked with and created us from. Maybe from the deep oceans, maybe from a meteorite with some little amoeba thing on it that got past all the defenses and guards that Mother Nature put up to it. Who knows? We're still trying to figure out the foundations of life, but we've got a good idea. It happened a long time ago and far, far away from where we are today. So, staring at these, knowing that there was something in specific things, if you burnt a rock and got it hot enough that it could turn into a metal, or it could release metals, that fumes could come off of it. One of the first metals we found, because of its abundance, is lead, and it turns out to be one of the nastier elements we shouldn't have been messing too much with. And we've relearned that lesson. The Romans learned about lead making people stupid. It's a continuous lesson through history. America did not invent this knowledge. The world did. So, spectroscopy. What is it? Still haven't gotten there. But the lead up to it is really in man staring at campfires and throwing his trash in the campfire to burn. And either having that or the stars to look at night. So, in our world and our words, we put a lot of gods around this, but I don't know that that's where their heads were. So they invented many gods to explain the many different things they were discovering or creating words themselves for, and this is how we got here. So they're staring at fires and looking at color. Where does it go? I mentioned Mendeleev a second ago. Well, Mendeleev met with people like Madame Curie in Paris and many other scientists. It's a fascinating history of the periodic table. The reason I looked at the periodic table is to figure out why it's so misleading, because it doesn't mention isotopes. And while the periodic table shows a bunch of elements, if you look at abundance, isotopic abundance, there are a lot more elements, because those have a carbon has many isotopes. We know one of them is used to measure decay and date some specific types of materials. So we know isotopes exist now. We're out measuring isotope ratios and comparing them to other nations, other continents, to learn where dust and pollution and life itself comes from, how seeds transport, how insects by the tons, billions of tons of insects are in the transport in our air. We've learned that. So Mendeleev was talking to Madame Curie. He met cesium, radioactive cesium. There is a stable cesium as well, stable in some terms. So uranium, sorry, probably should be using that word. It's a more colloquially common. So, and she died for it. And Mendeleev, I believe, passed after her, so he knew she died. And the people in that domain, in that world, remember, they didn't have cell phones. Hey, do you see who died today? Man, I saw her before she was dead. It was gross. What a terrible way to die. So you've never heard that conversation. I don't think there's a phone call about it. So Spectroscopy goes back very far in human history. The building, the multiple little pieces put together by human knowledge, collective knowledge, into some of the most sophisticated instruments in the planet. We use spectroscopy to analyze the composition of stars. We use spectroscopy to identify the fact of phase redshift. Okay? But if you've ever heard a train whistle, that difference in the tone of a train whistle is the same artifact that causes redshift. It's the movement of something through time. Movement through time can affect sound and affect light. So spectroscopy is an amazing set of research tools. So right now I'm talking about optical spectroscopy because this is the only thing that we had was our eyeballs to see this. As we got into learning about the rainbow and optics and optical facts, optical artifacts, the ability to differentiate materials versus light colors grew and grew. So what we have now, we can see red, yellow, and green. We can identify where the red, yellow, and green came from. If it came from the sun, it has specific wavelengths of light inside of it. It comes from a LED light. We can identify what type of LED light is coming out. Soft, in conversation, we talk about, the light being harsh or white light or diffused light or, what do they say? So when you go look at light bulbs, there's the intensity, the type of light, the amount of blue light, of red light, of green light is labeled somewhere on the new light boxes and light fixtures. We didn't have these other choices long ago. We had incandescent lights and who knows what was put in there, but some people did. So this ability of the eye to see these different colors perked us, tweaked us, led us into knowing that if you burn things, they emit a light specific to what's in them. Some emit a whole lot of light, it looks white, but others, you look at a sulfur burn, is different than whatever, throw a Yule log on. Watch how different types of trees burn. Some snap and crackle because they have a lot of resins and saps in them. They're not as good for burning as could be because you have to do chimney maintenance because of those resins. So optical, visually, what our eye can see led us over a long time into optics, looking at the rainbow, learning about mirrors and refraction, and interferometry, which is how all of this works, another big word, led us into prisms. When somebody invented glass, okay, an amorphous solid, when somebody invented glass, crystals that you can see through, that was a milestone in so many ways. It's a ceramic. Again, if you were a metallurgist, that's how you'd be thinking about it probably. But so that glass led us into prisms, which are fairly common, easy to get, which led us into mirrors, which led us into learning about mirrors, which led us into diffraction gratings, which are a prism on steroids used in advanced instruments. They're used in telescopes. They are optical flats with micro gratings etched in them or pressed in them or reprocessed. So optical gratings, optical flats, something else you could look up with. I could put a list of, go find this, that you can learn about. But I wish I had one of those optical gratings. I used to, and they are microfilm on a glass optical, it's not a flat, it can be a flat or damn close to it, but it's a focused lens with basically triangles etched into it. And it does diffraction just like a prism does, and then you stick some instruments out there that can measure those individual little colors coming out. So after studying this for years, who learned about this? Well, the Vatican universities was one of the Europe, this is before America, was one of the institutions that knew about this phenomenon, this miracle of light from specific objects in our environment, and that it meant something. It meant that you had good dirt to try and burn to get iron out of or get lead out of. That the dirt from 10 hills over didn't display the same colors when you tried to burn it, so maybe there's something different there. This is the other Bible not written, the other chapters in those books not written, or hard to find, the parts of history that maybe haven't been dug up as well as some other parts, for nefarious reasons, for profit maybe. So spectroscopy goes back in time to before writing does. People saw rainbows and began to wonder what that meant. People burning things in fires to make pottery and clays. Remember, this pottery and clay predates writing of any type. So that's how long we had to study the clay. We know the clay from here does better than the clay from here, because when the tribe migrated and tried to make pots at this next place where the hunting was good for the season, the clay was the dirt was no good. You couldn't take. But the cow patties burned anywhere, so cow patties for fires are probably very common. I wonder if they noticed the different cow patty burns, different cow patty colors across the regions they might have traveled over time. These were tough times. Native Americans were moving constantly to be able to harvest from the earth itself, to be able to meet the buffalo coming through for the season and harvest some meat off and live somewhere in peace for some time while the season's bountiful in that area, and be ready to move when the season comes, because it's hard to survive in the north in the cold. So you go to where the heat is. This study of fire and these colors goes back a long way, what we've done with it. So that was part of the fascinating of work. A company, Gerald Ash, very old optics company, founded out of European knowledge, brought over during the roaring world wars or in between, and they were doing spectroscopy as an elemental science, elemental measurements, and I happened to work on that equipment, so that's where it came from. But that Vatican University library book was something the size of a Harry Potter incantation book, to be silly about it. And it was pictures, it was film of elemental color lines, like hydrogen. When burned, pure hydrogen gives off 4 lines of color. It's just what it does. You'll get more lines because pure hydrogen is hard to find, but at that time they knew how to make hydrogen. So those types of records were being made. This film book was pages and pages of elements and compounds, because you get multiple spectrums depending on bonding being broke. So by having more of the spectrum, you can closer identify some of the ratio stuff going on inside of elemental bonding, molecular bonding, molecular bonds. You can make some assumptions about what's going on there. So this is truly deep stuff. This is why people have failed at it, like I'm going to at the beginning or the end of this. Looking at light is huge. So you take this space telescope that gives you a visual picture of what's there. and you put one of these optical flats or gratings in front of it, and it breaks that down into a spectrum of light. So instead of seeing a picture back, you're going to see a spectrum of light back from what made up, it's the composition of that picture, composition of the lights, the photons themselves collected from the distant object. You put it into space and you remove all of the calculations, the issues with the atmosphere and humidity and atmospheric pressure that causes Earth-based satellites a lot of error correction in their measurements. And it's noise reduction, noise removal. It's not error correction. It's not nothing wrong. It's that you know that this noise is there and you've got to correct for it in your calculations. So that little thing called an optical grating still is a milestone device in many of these instruments. It's what splits the light up into the individual elements. Now there's another way of doing this. These new CCD lenses can be built to respond to a much wider visual, it's not visual anymore, because visual is what the human eye can see. What the mechanical eye can see is a much wider spectrum. So those CCT cameras can be, the detectors themselves can be built, or whatever the acronym is for what's in the camera doing this recording that we're doing, right? You know, a little thing in there, a tiny little thing in there, we're doing this recording. It can do spectrum analysis as well. But this one's tuned to optical light. A different one can see different lights, add a grating in there, add a multi-million-dollar telescope, a multi-million-dollar launch pad, $1 billion in research basis dollars, and a launch pad for the satellite, and you got yourself a telescope. This is how wide this word spectrometry is. Inside of this, we learned about the time and frequency thing. And just like sound is a frequency, light has a frequency. So red, yellow, blue, green are frequencies. Frequencies are a time-dependent measurement. So, oh boy, here we go with time. So that's just a small intro. This is already 22 minutes, and all I've done is surface touch entry points into spectrometry, and this is why others have failed at it. They generally take a pass, and of this 23-minute video, about 2 minutes will get watched. And believe me, I get it. I truly do. Peace out, neighbors. This is probably a lunchtime video. A bit long. It'll take a while to upload, but days are getting longer.